What's going on, guys? Today we are going to be talking about a topic that I have been asked on a couple of times now, and that is ankle mobility in the squat. So when discussing ankle mobility in the squat, I want to make something incredibly clear. This video is going to discuss how I like to picture this topic and how I like to address it. And also, I want to make it clear that this is not going to be a video that just gives you an hour of mobility work and says, okay, good job, go improve your mobility. That's not what we're going to do here. Because when we're talking about ankle mobility in the squat specifically, I think it's far more productive to take a more task-oriented approach to it. How much range do you physically need in the ankle to execute the squat that you're trying to do? The point being is that when we look around on the internet and we look around on social media, we oftentimes see all of this mobility talk, and we often, I think, get marketed the idea that more is more. And that's not necessarily the case, because when we get more niche and focus on, let's say, ankle mobility and something like a squat, we need to be far more direct with how much range do we physically need for our individuality to achieve the postures that we need in our squat. So for example, if I'm coaching two lifters, one is a low bar squatter, one is a high bar squatter, they're different heights, the amount of range that they're gonna need in the ankle to achieve depth and the proper mechanics that I'm going for is going to be different. And this is really important to understand, because once we can get our mind wrapped around that this topic is more task oriented, we can stop wasting time chasing arbitrary ranges that we might not necessarily need for our ankle mobility in the squat. So when mobility is lacking in the ankle in the squat, there could be a plethora of things going on. Now I do want to make it clear, if you are somebody who has suffered a prior injury to the ankle and that's why you were limited mobility, we're not going to talk on that today. I would highly suggest seeking out a professional or working with a coach to be a bit more granular with how you approach this topic. So for our general lifter who has limited ankle mobility, there are usually two things going on. Number one is that your ankle doesn't feel stable achieving greater ranges of motion. So this means that as you move to greater degrees of dorsiflexion during the squat, your ankle is kind of guarding itself because it doesn't feel as though it can manage the external load you're asking it to handle. The second thing that could be going on is that you're just not physically practicing the skill of greater dorsiflexion, greater plantar flexion. So when we talk about mobility, and especially when we talk about greater ranges of motion in exercise, we have to remember that these are skill-focused things. We need to practice them to get better at them. So physically moving your ankle and externally loading through greater degrees of dorsiflexion and plantar flexion can be a really good thing here. And that's why I think a lot of folks who don't necessarily focus on the ankle joint or even like what the foot is doing or even the lower leg can be a bit limited in nature with how they approach ankle mobility in the squat. But now we're going to talk about a few different tools that I have used in my past for myself and for clients to achieve greater degrees of ankle mobility in the squat and just better means of how to approach this topic in general. The first bucket of tools that we're going to talk about are things that you can do for your warm-up for lower body days and just accessories that you can add on a weekly basis. So when we're talking about warm-up for your lower body days, if you have issues achieving greater ranges of motion at the ankle, something you can try is doing a light external foam roll on the front of the leg, so using it on the tib anterior, and the posterior part of the leg, so the gastrocnemius and the soleus. And what I want you to do here is to not spend a ton of time rolling. I just want you to focus on rolling at like a 6 out of 10 pressure and focusing on 3 areas on the front and the back side of the leg that feel fairly tight. Once you feel that tight area, go through dorsiflexion, plantar flexion, dorsiflexion, plantar flexion, and go through 3 reps there and then move to the second spot. This in total should take no longer than 3 to 5 minutes, and it could be a nice means to help us get a nice proprioceptive benefit from that foam roller to achieve greater ranges of motion. Because when we foam roll, we are not going to just magically increase range of motion that's gonna last. That's not what's happening. What's happening though is we are creating a proprioceptive benefit that can unlock greater degrees of range of motion. So by doing this, if it helps us get into a better position in the squat and allow us to get greater range of motion, then we could start focusing on practicing that skill. Second thing you could do in your warm-up is doing a front-loaded variation of the squat before you get under the barbell. So let's say you're doing a back squat. Using a front-loaded sandbag squat can be an awesome tool for focusing on cueing the knees to track a bit further. The reason I say front-loaded, so you can use a sandbag, you can use a goblet squat, you can even use a lighter front squat, is that kind of squat variation with an interior load is going to be more knee dominant. It is going to feel very uncomfortable to be so hip dominant and shoot those hips back with a front load. So by having that front load, we could focus on keeping that rib cage nice and stacked over the pelvis and allowing those knees to track. And it could be a nice, easy means to get a little bit of benefit for your ankle mobility in your traditional back squat, if that's what you're gunning for. Another thing that you could start doing and adding on a weekly basis is more tib anterior work and calf work. So doing tib anterior raises, so using an external resistance to train the tib anterior through greater ranges of motion while managing external load can be a really useful tool. And what I would say is to use a slower tempo, focus on pauses, focus on where you might feel like you're lacking a little bit, and then also doing things like calf raises. So training a bit more with the soleus if you're in a seated calf raise and a gastrocnemius with a standing calf raise, and moving once again with a nice slow tempo, trying to get deep ranges of motion and then maintain your stability in doing so. And that can have some benefit towards your ankle mobility in your squat. The second bucket of tools we're going to talk about are two different exercises that you can start using to, number one, teach your body how to remain more stable with a greater degree of dorsiflexion at the ankle in the squat, and then number two, how to cue better knee tracking in the squat. So the first exercise we're going to talk about is using a split squat with a front load. And now with this variation, what I want you to do is to focus on, as soon as you start that descending process, tracking that knee. The knee is what's going to be traveling first, and you're going to try to get the greatest range of motion you can while managing that load with a nice slow tempo, and then stopping once you feel that heel start to rise off the ground. So you're going to focus on allowing that knee to track, managing that load, using a nice slow tempo, and then at the bottom, pause for about a second or two. And this is going to help then train your body to feel comfortable managing an external load while being in a greater degree of range of motion at the ankle. The reason I like using a sandbag or a front load like a goblet, so if you're using a dumbbell or a kettlebell, is that the weight is going to then stay over that front leg, and it could be a bit easier then to cue that knee to track if this is something that is really tough for you to do. And so work with the range of motion you have. Don't just jam your knee forward. Work with a nice slow tempo, externally load at a means that is comparable for your needs. So if you have to start with body weight, that's totally okay. Do these for 3 to 5 reps. You can do these before your squat sessions or even at the end of lower body training days, just to focus on the skill of allowing that knee to track and allowing that ankle to feel more stable with a greater range. The second tool is to use a band to assist yourself with knee cueing. So in this example, what we're gonna do is attach a light band to an anchor and then the backside of the knee, and then we're gonna assume a split squat stance. There's gonna be a little bit of tension there on the leg. I don't want it to be fully relaxed once you go into flexion here. So do create a little bit of tension, and what you're gonna do is you're going to then use a 3 to 4 second eccentric, so lowering tempo, and allow that band to pull the knee forward. Allow that knee to track, and with this tempo, focus on maintaining that tempo and stability throughout this full range here. So as that band pulls you forward, focus on really nailing the strength aspect of controlling what your ankle is doing. So allow your knee to track and then create stability at the ankle with this nice slow tempo. You can add a pause here too as you want, and then you're gonna stand back up as normal and do this for a couple more reps. So generally 3 to 5 reps is the sweet spot here. And if you have more trouble doing this and cueing the knees to track, you can add a bit more reps there. And you could do this prior to your squat days or even as accessory skill work if you want. The third bucket is creating an environment that is conducive to your squat mechanics, your body, and what you need at the ankle when it comes to range of motion. So for this example, this would be using a wedge under the heels, using a plate to stand on, or even using weightlifting shoes. At times, I think the internet can sell us this idea that we need this huge range of motion, but in reality, if we just elevate the heel and put ourselves into an environment that is a bit more conducive to allow our body to feed into dorsiflexion, we're usually gonna be pretty well on our way. And actually just fighting for that extra range of motion can be kind of a waste of our time, especially if all we need to do is add a slight wedge to the heel and we're able to maintain the postures we're going for in our squat mechanics. So that all being said, this doesn't mean just necessarily ignore ankle mobility work if you do need a little bit of assistance there, but also don't try to fight for an arbitrary range that the internet is selling you on if all you need to really do is elevate the heel slightly and you'll get the range that you need. You might already have the range that you need for the ankle, and you're just not positioning yourself in a means to achieve that properly for the squat variation you are going for. All right guys, that wraps up this video on ankle mobility in the squat. Hopefully this answered a couple of questions you might have had on this topic. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of spending just a ton of time on mobility work, especially because if we're not defining how much range we need at the ankle specifically for something like the squat, it's kind of just arbitrary work, because then what are we actually trying to achieve? What range do we need? What ankle mobility goal do we actually have? If you have any questions on this topic, hit me in the comments below. And as always, guys, drop a like on the video, drop a subscribe on the channel. I'll see you guys in the next one.